A powerful CEO walks into her own luxury restaurant and witnesses something that stops her cold. A young waiter, clearly exhausted, clearly desperate, is being fired, not for stealing, not for being rude, but for hiding his sick little brother in a storage room just to keep him alive. What she does next doesn't just change his life. It transforms an entire company, a community, and maybe even the way you'll see kindness forever. Daniel Reyes woke up before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. The alarm on his cracked phone buzzed softly at 5:12 a.m., but he was already awake. He always was. Sleep had become something shallow, something temporary, like a pause between responsibilities rather than real rest. He turned his head toward the couch across the room. "Matteo," he whispered. A faint movement. A small cough. Relief. Daniel sat up slowly, careful not to make the old mattress creak too loudly. Their apartment wasn't much, just a single bedroom converted into two spaces by a thin curtain that didn't quite reach the floor. The walls were chipped. The heater worked when it felt like it. And the fridge, well, it was mostly empty most days. But it was home. And more importantly, it was all they had. He walked over quietly and placed a hand on Matteo's forehead. Still warm. Too warm. "Hey, little man," Daniel said softly, forcing a smile. "You awake?" Matteo blinked, his eyes heavy but alert. "Did you sleep?" Daniel chuckled lightly. "Of course I did." It was a lie. Matteo knew it. But he didn't say anything. Because at 12 years old, Matteo had already learned something no child should have to learn. Sometimes love sounds like pretending everything is okay. Daniel moved quickly after that. He checked the pill bottles lined up on the small table, counting them, always counting. Each one represented money they didn't have. Time they couldn't afford to lose. He poured water into a chipped cup. "All right, doctor's orders," he said gently, handing Matteo the medication. Matteo made a face. "This one tastes like sadness." Daniel laughed. "A real one this time." "Then drink it fast so the sadness doesn't stick." Matteo smiled weakly and obeyed. By 6 a.m., Daniel was already out the door, running to catch the bus. His uniform was clean, but only because he washed it every night by hand and hung it near the heater. His shoes were worn. The soles thin. But he polished them anyway. Because Daniel believed in something simple. If life wouldn't give you dignity, you created your own. The restaurant where Daniel worked was everything his life wasn't. Bright. Elegant. Perfect. Polished marble floors reflected golden chandeliers. Soft music played in the background while guests laughed over expensive meals. Every detail was designed to impress. Every movement choreographed for perfection. And Daniel was one of the best waiters they had. Not because he was trained that way, but because he cared. He remembered names. He noticed when someone looked sad. He brought extra bread to tables that lingered too long, just so they wouldn't feel rushed. Kindness wasn't part of the job description. But to Daniel, it was everything. "Table 12 needs water," the manager snapped one afternoon. "Already on it," Daniel replied, moving quickly. He was always moving quickly. Because time mattered. Every shift meant money. Every dollar meant medicine. And every missed hour could mean something he refused to think about. But things had been getting worse. Matteo's condition wasn't stable anymore. The medication wasn't enough. The hospital visits were becoming more frequent, more expensive. Daniel had already taken extra shifts. Already borrowed money. Already skipped meals. There was nothing left to cut back on. Nothing left to sacrifice. Except one thing. The first night he brought Matteo to the restaurant, his hands were shaking. "This is just temporary," Daniel whispered as he helped his brother into the back entrance. "Just until things get better." Matteo nodded, trusting him completely. That trust weighed heavier than anything else. The storage room was small. Barely enough space for a chair and some stacked boxes. Daniel cleared a corner, laying down an old jacket for Matteo to sit on. "I'll check on you every few minutes," he promised. "You always do," Matteo said with a faint smile. And Daniel did. Between taking orders, between delivering plates, between smiling at customers, he ran back there. Every chance he got. Days turned into weeks. No one noticed. Or maybe, no one looked closely enough to see. Until that night. The restaurant was packed. A high-profile crowd. Important guests. The kind of night where everything had to be flawless. Daniel was already stretched thin, 3 tables behind, orders stacking up, the kitchen shouting for coordination. And then? A crash. Loud. Sudden. From the back. Daniel's heart stopped. He ran. The storage room door was open. Boxes scattered across the floor. And Matteo collapsed. Breathing hard. Skin pale. "Matteo!" Daniel dropped to his knees. Hey, I'm here. I'm here." But he wasn't alone anymore. The manager stood in the doorway. Face stiff. Eyes sharp. "What is this?" Everything unraveled in seconds. Daniel tried to explain. Tried to speak through panic, through fear, through desperation. "He's sick, I didn't have anyone, I couldn't leave him, I just needed." Stop. Cold. Final. "You brought a child into a food storage area?" Daniel swallowed. "I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." That sentence hit harder than anything else. Because Daniel knew. For people like him, that wasn't always true. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice breaking now. "Please? I'll fix this. Just give me one more chance." But the manager had already decided. "You're fired." Just like that. No discussion. No understanding. No humanity. Daniel stood there, frozen. Then slowly. He nodded. Not because he agreed, but because he had no power to fight it. He picked Matteo up carefully, holding him close. And walked out. Past the shining tables. Past the laughing guests. Past a world that never noticed him until he broke a rule. What Daniel didn't know was that someone had been watching the entire time. From a quiet corner table. A woman who built this world. A woman who believed in rules more than excuses. A woman who was about to question everything she thought she knew. The restaurant slowly returned to its rhythm. Plates continued to move. Glasses clinked softly. Conversations resumed as if nothing had happened. But at one table, nothing felt the same. Elena Carter hadn't moved. Her untouched glass of water sat in front of her, condensation slowly dripping onto the pristine tablecloth. Her eyes remained fixed on the entrance where Daniel had just disappeared, carrying his brother like the world was collapsing in his arms. She had seen countless situations in her career. Employees making excuses. Managers enforcing rules. Systems working exactly as they were designed to. But this didn't feel like a system working. It felt like something breaking. Ms. Carter. The restaurant manager approached cautiously, his tone suddenly respectful now that he recognized who she was. I assure you, the situation has been handled. That employee violated multiple. His name, Elena said quietly. The manager paused. Excuse me. His name, she repeated, her voice calm but firm. Daniel. Daniel Reyes. She nodded slowly. And the boy? The manager hesitated. I'm not sure. That bothered her more than anything else. Not the violation. Not the disruption. But the fact that no one had thought to ask. Continue your service, Elena said, standing up. Of course, Ms. Carter. But as she walked toward the exit, her mind wasn't on the restaurant anymore. It was somewhere else. Somewhere she hadn't allowed herself to go in years. That night, Elena didn't sleep. Not because she couldn't, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. A hospital hallway. A younger version of herself. Her sister, lying still. Waiting for help that came too late. Elena sat up in bed, breathing slowly, deliberately. No, she whispered to herself. That's different. But the truth pressed harder. Was it? Back then, she had told herself something to survive the loss. If I become successful enough, powerful enough, no one I care about will ever suffer like that again. But somewhere along the way, that promise had changed. It had become about control. About perfection. About systems that didn't bend. And tonight, she had watched one of those systems fail someone who needed it most. By morning, Elena had made a decision. The address wasn't hard to find. Employee records were thorough, names, emergency contacts, home addresses. Data had always been her strength. But today, it felt different. This wasn't about efficiency. This was personal. The car slowed as it entered a part of the city Elena rarely visited. Buildings grew older. Paint peeled from walls. Windows told stories of people holding on, barely. She stepped out, her heels clicking against cracked pavement, a sound that felt out of place here. For a moment, she hesitated. Not out of fear, but uncertainty. What was she doing? She was a CEO. She didn't show up at employees' homes. She didn't cross that line. But something inside her pushed forward anyway. She knocked. It took a moment. Then another. Shuffling inside. A lock turning slowly. The door opened just a few inches. Daniel stood there. His eyes widened instantly. For a second, confusion flickered across his face. Then recognition. And then guarded tension. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, cautious. Not angry. Not rude. Just tired. Elena didn't respond immediately. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure what role she was supposed to play. CEO? Employer? Stranger? I came to check on your brother, she said finally. Daniel's grip tightened on the door. We're fine. It was automatic. Defensive. The kind of answer people give when they've learned the world doesn't help, it judges. Elena nodded slightly. I'm not here to fire you again, she said gently. A pause. Something shifted. After a long moment, Daniel opened the door wider. The apartment hit Elena all at once. The dim light. The silence. The weight of struggle in every corner. She stepped inside slowly, taking everything in without saying a word. The stack of medical bills. The near-empty fridge. The worn couch where Matteo lay, curled under a thin blanket. This wasn't irresponsibility. This wasn't negligence. This was survival. Matteo looked up weakly. Daniel. It's okay, Daniel said softly. Just someone from work. Elena stepped closer, her voice instinctively softer now. Hi, Matteo. He gave a small, uncertain smile. Hi. She crouched slightly, not towering over him, not imposing. Just present. And then she looked at Daniel. Can you tell me what's going on? At first, Daniel didn't speak. Because explaining meant reliving it. And reliving it meant admitting how close they were to losing everything. But something about Elena felt different now. She wasn't interrupting. Wasn't judging. Wasn't rushing. So he talked. About the diagnosis. About the bills. About the nights he stayed awake just to make sure Matteo was still breathing. About the impossible choices. I know it was wrong, Daniel said finally, his voice cracking. Bringing him there. I know. But I didn't have anyone. I couldn't leave him alone, and I couldn't lose the job. He swallowed hard. I just needed time. Silence filled the room. But it wasn't heavy. It was understanding. For the first time in a long time. Elena didn't analyze what she heard. She felt it. You weren't wrong, she said quietly. Daniel looked up, surprised. You were trying to protect your family. That sentence. It broke something open inside him. Not weakness. Relief. Because someone finally saw it. Not a rule breaker. Not a liability. But a brother, doing everything he could. Elena stood up slowly, her mind already moving, but differently than before. Not calculating profit. But possibility. Matteo needs proper medical care, she said gently. Daniel nodded. I know. I'm trying, I'll take care of it. The words hung in the air. Unbelievable. Too big. Too sudden. Daniel shook his head immediately. No. I can't. This isn't charity, Elena said, meeting his eyes. It's responsibility. He frowned slightly. Why? That question. It mattered. Elena took a breath. Because someone should have helped my sister, and they didn't. The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't just understanding. It was connection. That day didn't end with a dramatic miracle. There were no sudden recoveries. No instant solutions. But something powerful had started. Before she left, Elena made a few calls. Quiet ones. Efficient ones. By the next morning, Matteo had an appointment with a specialist. The costs were covered, no questions asked. And Daniel had a new opportunity. Not back as a waiter. But something different. Flexible. Remote. Sustainable. A role that didn't force him to choose between work and his brother's life. When Elena told him, Daniel just stared at her. Still trying to process everything. I don't understand, he said. You will, she replied softly. Because this wasn't just about helping one person. Even if Daniel didn't know it yet, he had just become the beginning of something much bigger. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours researching and crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me and helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. The first week felt unreal. Daniel kept waiting for something to go wrong. For a phone call saying there had been a mistake. For an email rescinding the offer. For reality to snap back into place the way it always had before. But it didn't. Instead, things slowly began to change. Matteo's first specialist appointment was the clearest sign. The hospital was nothing like the overcrowded clinics they were used to. Clean. Quiet. Attentive. For the first time in months, Matteo wasn't waiting endlessly for someone to notice him. Doctors listened. Nurses explained things carefully. And Daniel sat there, almost overwhelmed, holding on to every word like it mattered more than anything else in the world, because it did. There are treatment options, the doctor said calmly. Better ones than what he's currently receiving. Daniel blinked. Better. Yes. But they're expensive. A pause. Then the doctor added gently. I'm told that won't be an issue. Daniel didn't speak. He just nodded slowly, trying to hold himself together. That night, Matteo smiled for the first time in weeks. A real smile. I think I'm gonna get better, he said softly. Daniel swallowed hard. Yeah, he whispered. You are. And for the first time, he believed it. Daniel's new job wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with tips or fast-paced adrenaline. But it came with something far more valuable. Time. Working in logistics coordination, Daniel managed inventory schedules and supply tracking remotely. It was steady. Structured. And most importantly, it allowed him to stay home. To be there. At first, he struggled. The systems were unfamiliar. The expectations different. But Daniel had always been a quick learner, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because failure wasn't an option in his life. Late at night, after Matteo slept, Daniel studied. Training manuals. Company systems. Anything he could get his hands on. And sometimes, he'd get messages. Good work on the inventory report. Elena. Short. Direct. But to Daniel, they meant everything. Because they weren't just about performance. They were acknowledgement. But Daniel wasn't the only one changing. Inside the company, Elena Carter began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. Not data. Not metrics. People. During meetings, she started asking different questions. Not just, how do we improve efficiency? But, what challenges are our employees facing outside of work? At first, the room didn't know how to respond. Managers exchanged glances. Was this a test? A trick question? Work-related challenges, one executive asked cautiously. Elena shook her head. No. Life challenges. Silence. Because for years, that question had never been asked. It started with small adjustments. Flexible shifts for parents. Emergency assistance funds for employees in crisis. Access to healthcare resources. Nothing dramatic. Nothing flashy. But word spread quickly. Did you hear? They're letting Maria adjust her schedule so she can take care of her mom. Yeah, and James got help when his house flooded. They actually care now. At first, people were skeptical. Because kindness in corporate environments often came with conditions. Hidden expectations. Unspoken trade-offs. But this felt different. And slowly, people began to trust it. Weeks passed. Matteo's condition stabilized. Daniel settled into his new role. And something else began to happen. He started opening up. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But in small ways. One afternoon, during a virtual team meeting, a coworker mentioned struggling with childcare. Without thinking, Daniel spoke up. I get it, he said quietly. It's hard balancing everything. The room paused. Because Daniel rarely spoke unless necessary. Later, that same coworker messaged him privately. Thanks for saying that. I thought I was the only one barely holding things together. Daniel stared at the message for a long moment. Then replied. You're not. It was simple. But it mattered. Because Daniel was no longer just surviving. He was connecting. But change? Especially meaningful change. Never comes without resistance. 3 weeks into Elena's new initiatives, the pushback began. It's unsustainable. We're increasing costs without guaranteed returns. This isn't how you run a business. The boardroom was tense. Voices sharper. More urgent. One executive leaned forward. With all due respect, Elena, this isn't what we built this company on. Elena didn't react immediately. She had expected this. We built this company on excellence, she replied calmly. And excellence starts with people. Another voice cut in. But we're not a charity. That one lingered. Because it echoed something Elena herself had believed for years. She paused. Then said quietly. No, we're not. A beat. But we are responsible. While Elena fought battles in boardrooms, Daniel faced a different kind of challenge. Fear. Because deep down, he still didn't trust that this would last. One evening, as he reviewed work reports, Matteo spoke up from the couch. Do you think she'll take it away? Daniel looked up. What? The job. The help. All of it. Daniel hesitated. Because he didn't have a guaranteed answer. I don't know, he admitted quietly. Matteo nodded slowly. I just don't want things to go back to how they were. Neither did Daniel. But life had taught him something harsh. Good things didn't always stay. That same night, Elena sat alone in her office. The city light stretched endlessly outside her window. Emails filled her screen, concerns, warnings, projections. Numbers telling her one story. Her instincts telling her another. She leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. And once again, she saw her sister. That moment. That helplessness. That question that had never left her. What if someone had stepped in? Elena opened her eyes. This isn't a mistake, she said softly to herself. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't just building a successful company. She was building something that mattered. And she wasn't going to stop. Have you ever had to overcome obstacles to help someone you truly cared about? What challenges did you face, and was it worth it in the end? Share your experience below, I'd love to hear your story. The pressure didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. Elena walked into the next board meeting knowing this wouldn't be a discussion. It would be a test. Charts were already projected onto the screen. Cost increases. Projected losses. Risk assessments. We need to scale back these programs, one board member said firmly. They are not sustainable long term. Another added. We're running a business, not a social experiment. For a moment, the old Elena might have agreed. The version of her that believed numbers told the whole truth. The version that never questioned the system. But that version of Elena had changed. She stepped forward. Calm. Steady. Certain. You're right, she said. The room went quiet. This is a business. A pause. But tell me something, she continued, her voice firm but measured. What exactly are we building, if the people holding it together are breaking? No one answered. Because the question wasn't about profit anymore. It was about purpose. Elena turned toward the screen, and with a single motion, shut it off. We're looking at the wrong metrics, she said. Then she pulled up something new. Employee retention rates. Customer satisfaction trends. Internal feedback reports. And the numbers? Told a different story. Turnover had dropped. Performance had improved. Customer complaints had decreased. People aren't just working harder, Elena said. They're working better because they feel valued. The room shifted. Not convinced. But no longer dismissive. This isn't charity, she said again, echoing her earlier words. It's investment. And this time, it landed. While Elena fought at the top, Daniel was quietly becoming something he had never had the chance to be before. Stable. Matteo's health improved steadily. The new treatments worked. The hospital visits became less frequent. The fear that had once hovered over every moment began to fade. One afternoon, Matteo sat up straighter than usual, flipping through a school workbook. Hey, he said, grinning. I think I'm actually getting smarter. Daniel laughed. You were always smart. Yeah, but now I can prove it. That moment, simple as it was, meant everything. Because it wasn't just about health. It was about possibility. And Daniel felt it too. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting to life. He was planning for it. He began helping others at work more actively. New employees. Struggling team members. People who reminded him of himself just a few months ago. One message turned into two. Two turned into conversations. "Hey, I heard you've been helping people out," a coworker said during a call. Daniel shrugged. "Just doing what I can." But what he didn't realize was this. His story was spreading. Not as gossip, but as inspiration. Elena's initiatives didn't stay contained within the company. Other businesses began noticing. How are they improving performance while increasing flexibility? What are they doing differently? Questions turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into imitation. Soon, local partnerships formed. Community organizations reached out. Support networks began to grow. A childcare program here. A medical assistance fund there. Mentorship groups forming quietly behind the scenes. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And it all traced back to one moment. One decision. To see someone instead of dismiss them. Months later, everything had changed. The same restaurant. The same polished floors. The same elegant atmosphere. But something felt different. Warmer. Employees smiled more, not forced, but genuine. Managers spoke with respect, not just authority. There was laughter behind the scenes. Understanding. Humanity. And on that evening, Elena returned. Not for inspection. Not for evaluation. But for reflection. She sat at a table quietly, observing. Not as the architect, but as someone who had finally learned what truly mattered. And then, she saw them. Daniel walked in. Not in uniform. Not rushing between tables. But standing tall. Confident. Beside him, Matteo. Healthier. Stronger. Smiling in a way that felt impossible just months ago. They weren't hiding anymore. They belonged. Elena stood slowly. Daniel noticed her first. For a moment, they just looked at each other. No words. Because words couldn't capture everything that had changed. Then Daniel walked over. "Hi," he said. Simple. But filled with meaning. Elena smiled softly. "Hi, Daniel." Matteo stepped forward slightly. "You're the reason I'm still here," he said honestly. Elena blinked, caught off guard. "No," she said gently. "You're here because your brother never gave up on you." Daniel looked down for a second. Then back up. "And because you didn't give up on us." That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not loud. But powerful. Because it wasn't just gratitude. It was proof. Proof that kindness works. As the evening continued, Elena noticed something else. A new employee struggling with their first shift. Nervous. Overwhelmed. Before a manager could step in, Daniel approached them. "Hey," he said with a reassuring smile. "I've been there. Let me help." And just like that, the cycle continued. The one who once needed help was now giving it. Not because he had to, but because someone had shown him how. Elena watched quietly. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Peace. Because the system she built was no longer just efficient. It was human. This story shows how one act of kindness can truly change everything. So let me ask you, what's one small way you could make a difference in someone's life today? Challenge yourself and share your commitment in the comments below. Time has a quiet way of revealing what truly lasts. Not the headlines. Not the profits. Not the moments that seem big at the time. But the impact we leave behind. 6 months later, the changes Elena Carter made weren't just holding, they were growing. Her company, once known only for its precision and luxury, had developed a new reputation. Not just as a place that delivered excellence, but as a place that valued people. Employee turnover had dropped to its lowest level in years. Applications increased, not just from people looking for jobs, but from people looking for purpose. Customers noticed too. They couldn't always explain it, but they felt it. The warmth. The authenticity. The sense that something real existed beneath the polished surface. And Elena? She still led with discipline. Still made tough decisions. Still demanded excellence. But now, she listened first. Her office door, once a symbol of distance, was open more often than it was closed. And sometimes, she would pause in the middle of a busy day, just to ask someone how they were doing, and actually wait for the answer. Because she had learned something no business school ever taught her. People don't just work for a paycheck. They work for dignity. For understanding. For someone to see them. Daniel's life had transformed in ways he once thought were impossible. His work had stabilized. His confidence had grown. But more importantly, his fear had faded. The constant weight that once followed him, the fear of losing everything overnight, was gone. In its place was something new. Hope. Matteo was back in school full-time now. Stronger. Healthier. And just as bright as Daniel always knew he was. But perhaps the most unexpected change was what Matteo started doing in his free time. Writing letters. Simple letters. Handwritten. To the doctors who helped him. To the nurses who stayed late. To the people in Daniel's company who made things possible. Thank you for helping my brother not be scared anymore. Thank you for making me feel like I matter. Those letters made their way around. Passed from hand to hand. Desk to desk. Office to office. And each time someone read one, they were reminded of something easy to forget. That behind every policy, every decision, every system, there are real lives being affected. What started as one act of kindness didn't stop with Daniel. Other employees began stepping forward, helping each other, sharing their stories, supporting one another in ways that went beyond job descriptions. Managers began leading differently, not just with authority, but with empathy. And beyond the company, something even bigger began to take shape. Local businesses adopted similar practices. Community programs expanded. Partnerships formed. Not because they had to, but because they saw what was possible. All from one decision: to stop and care. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Elena stood by her window, looking out at the city. The same city she had once tried to conquer. The same city she now understood in a completely different way. Her reflection stared back at her. Familiar, but changed. "I thought success meant control," she said softly to herself. A pause. "But it really means connection." For years, she had believed strength meant never bending. Never making exceptions. Never letting emotion influence decisions. But now, she knew better. Because the strongest thing she had ever done was choose kindness when it would have been easier not to. This story isn't just about a CEO, or a waiter, or even a single act of kindness. It's about something much deeper. It's about the moments where we're given a choice: to look away, or to step in, to follow the rules, or to follow our humanity. Because the truth is, you don't need to be a CEO to change someone's life. You don't need power, or wealth, or influence. Sometimes, all it takes is one decision: to listen, to understand, to care. Because you never know. The person you help today might be the reason someone else finds hope tomorrow. Stories like this remind us that extraordinary kindness exists all around us. If this touched your heart, please like this video. It helps more people discover these inspiring stories. Subscribe for more tales of human kindness that will restore your faith in humanity. And most importantly, look for opportunities in your own life to be someone's unexpected blessing. So tell me, what act of kindness will you perform this week? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. And remember, you have the power to change someone's entire world.